In severe infectious disease states, one of the most dangerous biologic events is not always the pathogen itself. Sometimes, the greatest damage emerges from the body's own immune response. In hantavirus-associated disease, this process may escalate into a highly amplified inflammatory systems event, commonly referred to as a cytokine storm. This presentation explores the system's biology of cytokine dysregulation, endothelial failure, pulmonary vascular injury, and immune-mediated respiratory collapse through the lens of hantavirus pathophysiology. The objective of this presentation is not fear. The objective is biologic understanding. This presentation is presented by Brian Geniuson, research scientist and founder of Natural Scientifics, focusing on systems biology, molecular pathology, translational medicine, immunologic signaling networks, and integrated public health systems research. Over the next several minutes, this scientific presentation will examine innate immune activation, interferon signaling cascades, cytokine amplification systems, endothelial permeability dysregulation, pulmonary inflammatory injury, vascular leakage biology, and the systems-level mechanisms underlying severe hantavirus-associated disease progression. The systems framework shown throughout this presentation is designed to visualize how molecular signaling, immune activation, endothelial dysfunction, and pulmonary systems injury dynamically interact during severe inflammatory disease states. To understand cytokine storm biology, we must begin with the innate immune system. Following hantavirus exposure and viral replication, innate immunologic activation pathways become rapidly engaged. Pattern recognition receptors detect viral material and initiate interferon-mediated antiviral signaling cascades. This early response is initially protective. Interferon signaling helps suppress viral replication, activate antiviral defense systems, recruit immune cells, and coordinate early inflammatory containment. However, in severe disease states, inflammatory signaling may become dysregulated. Instead of controlled immune activation, the biologic response may transition into excessive cytokine amplification. This is where the system's cascade begins accelerating. Activated macrophages, monocytes, dendritic cells, and additional inflammatory immune populations begin releasing large quantities of signaling molecules, including interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, interferon gamma, chemokine signaling mediators, and vascular inflammatory regulators. Under excessive amplification conditions, these signaling pathways no longer remain localized. The inflammatory response begins propagating systemically. But the immune signaling itself is only part of the story. To understand severe hantavirus disease progression, we must move deeper into endothelial systems biology. The vascular endothelium functions as a dynamic biologic interface regulating vascular integrity, coagulation balance, inflammatory trafficking, tissue oxygenation, and immune cell communication (RED). In severe inflammatory states, cytokine amplification begins disrupting endothelial barrier stability. Microvascular endothelial permeability increases, capillary integrity deteriorates, fluid begins leaking into surrounding tissue compartments. Within pulmonary tissue, this becomes especially dangerous. As vascular permeability escalates inside the lungs, pulmonary edema develops, alveolar gas exchange deteriorates, oxygen diffusion becomes impaired, and respiratory physiology destabilizes rapidly. This capillary leak syndrome-like biology represents one of the defining mechanisms underlying severe hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. At the molecular level, multiple signaling systems interact simultaneously during this inflammatory cascade. Major biologic systems involved may include interferon regulatory pathways, chemokine signaling systems, oxidative stress pathways, endothelial activation cascades, coagulation inflammatory feedback loops, and leukocyte recruitment signaling networks. Importantly, cytokine storm biology is not a single pathway event. It is a systems-level amplification phenomenon involving dynamic interaction between immune signaling, vascular biology, inflammatory recruitment, endothelial dysfunction, and tissue injury progression. As pulmonary injury intensifies, Additional physiologic stress systems become activated. Hypoxemia worsens. Inflammatory recruitment increases further. Coagulation dysregulation may intensify. Microvascular injury expands, and systemic physiologic stability progressively deteriorates. This is why severe hantavirus-associated disease can progress rapidly once inflammatory amplification and endothelial permeability dysregulation begin reinforcing one another simultaneously. The pulmonary system becomes one of the most vulnerable biologic targets during this cascade. Diffuse inflammatory lung injury may result in respiratory failure, severe hypoxemia, vascular congestion, and multi-system physiologic stress. In advanced disease states, intensive supportive care may become necessary. Modern clinical management for severe hantavirus-associated disease remains largely supportive. Medical intervention strategies may include oxygenation support, respiratory stabilization, hemodynamic monitoring, inflammatory complication surveillance, and escalation to intensive care management when necessary. Because severe disease progression may accelerate rapidly, early recognition remains critically important. Intervention before advanced pulmonary deterioration substantially improves stabilization potential. This cytokine storm framework highlights several major systems biology principles. First, severe infectious disease is often driven not only by pathogens themselves, but by dysregulated host response biology. Second, the vascular endothelium plays a central role in inflammatory disease progression. Third, immune amplification and endothelial permeability dysregulation create highly dangerous biologic feedback loops capable of rapidly escalating tissue injury. And finally, understanding systems-level inflammatory biology is critically important for future translational medicine, immunologic research, and outbreak response preparedness. This presentation integrates publicly available information and established scientific literature relating to hantavirus immunology, endothelial pathology, cytokine signaling biology, pulmonary vascular injury, inflammatory amplification systems, and translational immunologic research. Primary informational references include World Health Organization educational resources, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention materials, peer-reviewed hantavirus pulmonary syndrome literature, vascular immunology research, and established inflammatory signaling studies. The scientific interpretation presented here is designed solely for educational and systems-level scientific communication purposes. Cytokine storm biology demonstrates how infectious disease progression may emerge from highly interconnected systems interactions involving immune signaling, endothelial dysfunction, pulmonary injury, inflammatory amplification, and vascular instability. The future of translational infectious disease science increasingly depends upon understanding these systems as integrated biologic networks rather than isolated pathways. As systems biology, immunology, and translational medicine continue evolving, integrated inflammatory response modeling will become increasingly important for outbreak preparedness, therapeutic strategy, biomarker development, and public health resilience. This presentation is intended solely for educational and scientific communication purposes. It is not intended to provide medical diagnosis, treatment recommendations, or individualized clinical guidance. Information reflects systems-level scientific interpretation based on publicly available evidence and established literature available at the time of production. Always consult qualified healthcare professionals and official public health authorities for medical guidance. For additional scientific presentations exploring systems biology, molecular pathology, immunologic signaling, translational medicine, endothelial biology, infectious disease architecture, and integrated public health systems Science Day. Subscribe and follow future educational releases from Brian Geniuson, research scientist, Natural Scientifics.